Episode 6, Brushy Mountain State Prison. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poison Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. So this week's episode is on Brushy Mountain Prison in Tennessee. A friend of mine told me I should cover this one, and it's definitely an interesting place. So I really quickly want to just thank everyone who has supported me. My Facebook page is up to 1,300 people following me, so that's awesome. I'm just amazed and grateful for this. I hope you all are enjoying this as much as I am. But enough about that. Let's get started on Brushy Mountain Prison. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary is the proper name, but it's hard for me to say penitentiary, so I'm going to say prison from now on. So Brushy Mountain State Prison operated for 113 years before shutting down in 2009. In that time, it carved a place in the nation's culture of crime, punishment, violence, and labor. Some people called it Tennessee's Alcatraz, some called it Hell on Earth, others called it the end of the line. Around 40 miles northwest of Knoxville, men who were stripped of their freedom dug into the hills and built a place once referred to as the worst thing in the state of Tennessee. With the creation of the railroad and being in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, much like Pennsylvania and steel, the coal industry was huge by the late 1800s. However, the work was hard and dangerous, and when miners began striking for better pay and conditions, the mine owners would often lease convicts from the state instead. The prison lease system was adopted throughout the South, mainly because state governments couldn't afford to build and maintain prisons or feed, shelter, and clothe the inmates, and a convict lease program cut costs and brought in money. Beyond that, officials could exploit this 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, but allowed involuntary servitude for criminal punishment. When federal troops left the South in 1877 after Reconstruction, state officials who were hostile to former slaves handed down long prison terms and life sentences, even for petty crimes. Soon, black people made up the majority of the prisons in the South. The miners were obviously unhappy with competition from the prisoners. In 1891, the town of Cold Creek, now called Rocky Top, just north of Brushy Mountain, local miners raided the prison work camp and sent all the prisoners packing, starting the Cold Creek War. The Cold Creek War was an armed labor uprising. The labor conflict ignited during 1891 when coal mine owners in the Cold Creek watershed began to remove and replace their company-employed private coal miners, then on the payroll, with convict laborers leased out by the Tennessee State Prison System. These former wage-earning Coal Creek coal miners repeatedly attacked and burned both state prison stockades and mine properties, all while releasing hundreds of state convict laborers from their bondage to the mine companies. Many of these same Coal Creek coal miners were wounded or killed in small arms skirmishes during the Coal Creek War, along with dozens of Tennessee state militiamen. One historian described the Coal Creek War as one of the most dramatic and significant episodes in all of American labor history. The Coal Creek War was part of a greater labor struggle across Tennessee that was launched against the state's government's controversial convict leasing system, which I mentioned earlier, which allowed the state prison system to lease convict labor to mining companies and other business enterprises as well. So that suppressed employee wages in the open market across the state, which made it hard on earning people to make any kind of living. The labor conflict brought the issue of convict leasing to public. Although the Coal Creek War essentially ended with the arrest of hundreds of former company miners in 1892, the adverse exposure that the state conflict with private labor generated nationwide led to the downfall of Governor John P. Buchanan and forced the Tennessee General Assembly to reconsider its state convict labor leasing system. The Tennessee government later refused to renew its convict labor lease contracts with private businesses upon the arrival of the 1896 expiration dates, making Tennessee one of the first states within the southern United States to end its controversial practice. This in no way really helped the prisoners, though. Instead of leasing their prisoners to others, the state of Tennessee decided to go in business for themselves and to open their own coal mine, using prisoners as free labor. A wooden prison building called Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary was built in 1896 in Petros. Railroad tracks were laid to the adjacent Frozen Head mine, and the state was in business. The mountainous, secure site was located with the help of consulting geologists, and Brushy Mountain convicts built a railroad spur, worked on the coal mines on the site, operated coke ovens, or farmed the area. At the end of the state's convict lease arrangements on January 1st, 1896, some 210 of the prisoners became the first inmates of Brushy Mountain. The prison was first built here by the prisoners themselves. It was completely made out of wood. And of course, the inmates were used as unpaid miners. Quite a profitable setup for the state. By 1896, inmates were building on-site railroad spur as well as the original wooden prison structure with their own hands. Between the ongoing violence, deadly mining accidents, and chronic illnesses, life inside Brushy was precarious to say the least. Diseases were rampant, including tuberculosis, typhoid fever, pneumonia, and syphilis, which alone affected 3/4 of the black prisoners. Beyond generally poor medical care and treatment, inmates were routinely beaten for underproducing in the mines. Despite their dire health conditions, or because of their dire health conditions, many died as a result. It was dangerous in the mine, cave-ins were frequent, disease was rampant, and the prison was soon severely overcrowded. There's definitely a lot of violence, tragedy, and death in Brushy's history. The original structure of Brushy Mountain Prison was wooden, as I said, and built by the inmates. It was a horrible place to be incarcerated, and men frequently died, like I said, in the mining accidents, or disease, or they were murdered by other inmates. Prisoners ranged from murders to petty theft convicts, but everyone worked at the mine regardless of their crime. At the Frozen Head mine, the coal was very high in methane. It was a difficult job and treacherous location performed by imprisoned men who often had no prior mining experience. Dozens of inmates died in mining accidents. Inmates worked all day. If they stopped, they found painful motivation from a 7-foot leather strap. After a day of abuse underground, the convicts spent the night in an overcrowded, disease-infested wooden building heated by fire. If the coal mines and the disease did not kill you, another inmate might. Murder was a common cause of death at Brushy Mountain State Prison. Black men made most of the prison population, reflecting on the racial biases of the era. By the 1930s, the prison housed 3 times the population it was built for, and day and night shift workers had to split the same bed. This attracted state and national attention for the dire conditions of its inmates. In 1931, Brushy housed 976 men, roughly 300 more than its capacity. It drew comparisons to conditions from inside the infamous Siberian prisons of the Soviet Union. The state's answer was simple. Plans were drawn for a new structure to be made of reinforced concrete, and they made prisoners break sandstone out of the nearby quarry to build the new prison. It stood 4 stories high and was surrounded by an 18-foot stone wall. For a moment, things got better. The new prison was a lot safer and more sanitary, but it still housed very violent criminals, and inmates kept killing inmates. On a couple occasions, guard killed fellow guards. The mines remained a death trap, the cave-ins continued, and so did the beatings. Prisoners who took all they could stand and had one method of standing up for themselves. They went on strike and refused to work. There were hundreds of inmates down in the mines with a few guards, but you could not easily or quickly force them out. So prisoners organized strikes in the mines to force the authorities to acknowledge their complaints. At least half a dozen times from the 1920s to the 1960s, inmates took guards hostage in the mines and refused to come out until their grievances were heard. The prisoners who made trouble, though, paid a painful price. The state doled out lashings at the leaders of the prison strikes. A Knoxville News Sentinel article from August 1933 states the leader of one of the strikes was diagnosed as insane and shipped off to a mental institution. The article said the insanity diagnosis was based on a blood test. The inmates did whatever they could to get away from the abusive environment and deadly job in the coal mines. The job involved going deep underground and blasting coal free with dynamite. In 1938, the prisoners blasted their way to freedom by tumbling to the other side of the mountain. A total of 38 convicts were suddenly on the loose, and many were armed with dynamite from the mines. Most were quickly recaptured within a few days, sometimes by average citizens. The prison mines continued until the 1960s. The mines were no longer profitable for the state. The last of Brushy Mountain coal came out of the ground with the inmates in 1966. Mines were closed for good. There was a warden who wanted to stop the labor and fought for reform, Lake Russell, and he was a former football coach at nearby Carson Newman College, and he finally stopped the mining at Brushy Mountains. He was a warden from 1965 to 68 and helped to close the mines for good. The prison had a reputation for the last stop for the worst criminals, but in 1969, Brushy Mountain was reclassified as primarily maximum security when 100 beds were added to the house of lesser offenders outside the walls. Many of the new minimum security inmates were entrusted with jobs serving the outside community, such as participating in the Petros Voluntary Fire Department, which operated 24/7 between 1971 and 1994. The mountains were more of a prison than the prison was. There's only one way in and out, and that's through the mouth of the valley through Petros. Of course, many people have tried to escape by going over the mountain, and that did not fare well for most of them. Escapes were a regular occurrence because inmates were not always confined to cages behind stone walls and barbed wire. They were constantly moving back and forth between the main prison site, the prison's farms, a few miles away, the coal mines, and the courthouses. A search of newspaper archives from 1922 to 2009 revealed hundreds of reports of escapes and killers on the loose for the prison in Petros. They escaped on foot. They stole cars. One report from August 1931 says a Knoxville man was on the lam from Brushy's after stealing a mule. Some families who lived in Morgan County, when they learned of a prisoner escape, they would put a meal out and a change of clothes outside the home, go inside, lock all the doors. If a desperate inmate came across their property, the food and clothes would hopefully provide enough resources for them to keep moving instead of potentially robbing the home and taking hostages. The prison was closed in 1972 after a strike by prison guards protesting unsafe working conditions, and it reopened in 1976. Brushy Mountain was the only unionized prison in the state. The union worked closely with state legislators to improve the working conditions for correctional staff across the state. Even after it opened back up, though, the guards complained that they did not have enough staff to maintain watch over everything, which is perhaps why James Earl Ray's escape in 1977 was successful, or partially successful. So this leads us to one of the most infamous prisoners of Brushy Mountain, James Earl Ray. He's best known for his escape attempt. The best known escape attempt of his occurred in June 10, 1977. When James Earl Ray, the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., escaped with 6 other inmates by climbing over a fence. The FBI and U.S. Marshal Service swarmed into Morgan County, but a little more than 2 days later, local trackers and hound dogs found him exhausted and buried under leaves trying to mask his scent. He'd only made it a few miles from the prison walls. Ray was captured less than 58 hours later in rugged mountain terrain, 8.5 miles from the prison. In June 1981, 3 inmates attacked James Earl Ray in the prison library. He underwent surgery for 22 stab wounds to the face, chest, and arms. He also suffered internal injuries from being beaten. The surgeon said it took 77 sutures to close the wounds, but none of them were dangerous. In 1982, 7 white inmates used a pistol smuggled from the prison to hold a guard hostage and attack a group of 4 black inmates. They killed 2, but the other 2 survived by hiding behind their mattresses. The inmates who died February 8th were shot in their cells at close range by other prisoners who sawed through the bars to free themselves from their own cells. They had taken 4 guards hostage and emptied 11 rounds from a .25 caliber automatic pistol, which I don't know anything about guns, so if I said that wrong, I'm sorry. Many people thought the incident was in retaliation for the stabbing of James Earl Ray by some black prisoners the year before, but others thought it was just more of the gang violence typical of Brushy Mountain. Guards at Brushy Mountain at the time said black and white factions struggling for power had fermented tensions that have grown to race war proportions with powder keg potential at the time. In the 1980s, Brushy Mountain ended its long-standing function as a maximum security prison and assumed a mission as a classification facility. In its final operations, it had a capacity of 584 and was used as the state's reception, classification, and diagnostic center for East Tennessee. It housed all custody levels of inmates, although it retained a maximum security designation because of the 96-bed maximum security annex contained within the prison walls, which was used to house the state's most troublesome inmates. During the late 1990s, state officials implemented a comprehensive prison redevelopment program that expanded the Morgan County Correctional Complex and accelerated Brushy Mountain's demise. The last warden was Jim Worthington. The prison closed on June 11, 2009 after 113 years of operation. Its functions were transferred to the Morgan County Correctional Complex. The historic penal complex reopened in 2018 as a regional tourist attraction containing a museum, restaurant, concert venue, and distillery. But before talking a little bit more about how it is now, I'd like to go over some of Brushy Mountain's most infamous prisoners. We'll start with the one I already mentioned, James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray was a fugitive who escaped from prison in Missouri when he shot and killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at a hotel in Memphis in April 1968. He had always been a thief, a fraud, and criminal, and managed to escape his sentence for armed robbery, sneaking out of the Missouri State Penitentiary in a bakery truck. After he killed Dr. Martin Luther King, Ray escaped the country, but was caught in England and brought back to the U.S. Then he escaped the death penalty by pleading guilty to murder. Later, Ray said he was coerced by the FBI into confessing for the murder of Dr. King, although he says he didn't do it. He arrived at Brushy Mountain Prison in 1970 and immediately tried to escape. While there, he made 4 prison escape attempts. He was attacked by the black prisoners and stabbed 22 times, as mentioned earlier. Ray left Brushy Mountain for good in 1992 and died at the state facility in Nashville 6 years later. And that's all I have to say about him, really. We all know about him. Byron Lotax Looper was a Democratic-turned-Republican politician in Tennessee and a convicted murderer. In order to advance his political career, he legally changed his name from Anthony to Lotax, including the parentheses. After being convicted in the October 1998 murder of his election opponent, incumbent Tennessee State Senator Tommy Burks, he was given a life sentence in prison. In August 2000, Looper was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without chance of parole. The victim's family had requested that prosecutors not seek the death penalty. Following his conviction and sentencing, he was transferred to Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Petros, Tennessee. And when the Brushy Mountain Penitentiary closed in 2009, Looper was moved to the Morgan County Correctional Complex. He died in 2013. Paul Dennis Reed, known as the fast food killer, was an American serial killer convicted and sentenced to death for 7 murders during 3 fast food restaurant robberies in metropolitan Nashville, Tennessee, and Clarksville, Tennessee, between the months of February and April 1997. At the time of the murders, Reed lived with his roommate Brian Fozard at a boarding house and was on parole from a 1983 conviction in Texas on charges relating to aggravated armed robbery at a Houston steakhouse. He served 7 years of a 20-year sentence and was paroled in 1990. On the morning of February 6, 1997, Reed entered Captain D's in Nashville, Tennessee, before opening under the guise of applying for a job. Once inside, he forced employee Sarah Jackson, 16, and the manager Steve Hampton, 25, into the restaurant's cooler. Reed forced the two to lie down, face down on the floor and then shot them execution style. On the evening of March 23, 1997, at a McDonald's in Nashville, located 3.4 miles northeast of the Captain D's, Reed approached four employees as they exited the store after closing. At gunpoint, he forced them back into the restaurant. Reed shot 3 employees to death execution style in the storeroom. Andrea Brown, 17, Ronald Santiago, 27, and Robert Sewell. Reed attempted to shoot Jose Antonio Ramirez Gonzalez, but his weapon failed. Gonzalez took his opportunity to fight back, but was overpowered after being stabbed with the knife that Reed was carrying. Reed stabbed Gonzalez a total of 17 times and left him for dead. But Gonzalez avoided further attacks by lying completely still and pretending to be dead. And he actually survived to be a witness to testify at his murder trials. On the evening of April 23rd, 1997, Reed went to the door of a Baskin-Robbins in Clarksville, Tennessee after closing. He persuaded the employees to let him inside. Once again, he kidnapped Angela Holmes, 21, and Michelle Mays, 16, and forced the two to Dunbar Cave State Park. Their bodies were discovered the next day at the park. Their throats had been slashed. Reed received 7 death sentences for his convictions, the first 2 coming on April 20th, 1999. Reed's execution was stayed several times in the years following, including an instance in 2003, just hours before his scheduled execution. Reed eventually waived his right to an appeal. Members of the family, along with anti-death penalty activists, claimed he was mentally handicapped and unable to make a decision, and filed multiple motions, both successful and unsuccessful, to stay his execution. However, the Tennessee Supreme Court upheld all of Reed's sentences. Reed's case received national attention among death penalty activists. Reed resided at Brushy Mountain until they closed, and then he went to Tennessee's Morgan County Correctional Complex. His 7 death sentences are the most ever handed down by a single person in the state of Tennessee. Reed died at Nashville General Hospital on November 1st, 2013, 11 days before his 56th birthday. The cause of death was from complications due to pneumonia, heart failure, and upper respiratory issues. Now that Brushy Mountain Prison has been closed permanently, it's become an attraction containing a museum, restaurant, concert venue, and distillery. Sickness and violence ran rampant in the often overcrowded prison, and there were many murders. Bodies were reportedly stacked in unmarked mass graves. There were an estimated 10,000 deaths over the history of Brushy Mountain. With that many people dying there, I'm sure there are more than a few ghosts haunting around the prison, and they offer paranormal tours. While visiting the prison, be sure to stop at the restaurant, the Warden's Table. According to the website, the Warden's Table couples tasteful, fresh daily dishes made with the highest quality ingredients that emphasize Southern cuisine. With plenty of room for families and large groups, food is served cafeteria style, so you'll be in and out before you know it, giving you time to browse in the gift shop and spend time touring the prison. And believe me, I looked at the pics of the food and they look delicious. If I was there, I'd definitely get to the restaurant. Also, they have their own distillery where they make end-of-the-line moonshine, double barrel whiskey, and much more. You can even order online. I'm not a drinker, but it looks like nice stuff, I guess. When I posted about this upcoming episode on Facebook, a friend of mine said that her dad was incarcerated there in the 1940s, so that's pretty interesting. He's no longer with us, but man, that would be a cool interview. But I just thought that was an interesting side note. So Brushy Mountain Prison is in Morgan County, Tennessee, and at the 2020 census, the population was 21,035. Its county seat is Wartburg, I guess. I don't know. Morgan County is part of the Knoxville, Tennessee Combined Statistical Area. I've been to the Smoky Mountains a ton of times, and Knoxville isn't really that far, so maybe next time I'll check out the Brushy Mountain and prison in Morgan County itself. While in Morgan County, Tennessee, it says you can do whitewater rafting on the Big South Fork or paddle the wild and scenic Obed River. You can go camping and hiking in the beautiful Frozen Head State Park. There are horseback trails in the Lone Mountain State Forest. Also, I saw that they have a bunch of ATV trails too, so that would be kind of interesting if you'd like to do that. You can also view the past in the historical town of Rugby, or just settle in for a cozy afternoon at one of the bed and breakfast hotspots and stay in the wonder of the wilderness of the area. Also, one last thing to add, there's a race ran yearly near that area called the Barkley Marathons, and that's actually where I first heard of the prison, because they ran through that area. There's a good documentary on it. It explains the race. Even if you don't like running, it's a fun documentary. It's definitely a very quirky race, but I really enjoyed it, and I saw that a year or two ago. But that's Brushy Mountain Prison. Has anyone ever been there? Anyone heard of it? It's definitely an interesting story. I actually really enjoyed doing this one. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Once again, thanks for listening. If you could, please rate and share this podcast, and comment if you can, if you're on Apple or anything like that. You can follow me on socials under Poisoned Appalachia. I'm on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, TikTok, and now YouTube. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to contact me on my email, poisonedappalachia@gmail.com, or hit me up on Facebook. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening, and thanks for being so supportive of this. I really appreciate it, and I think you guys are all awesome. Have a great week. Bye.